Blood-curdling screams echoed through the dusty streets of Twin Falls, Wyoming, as Katherine Morgan was dragged across the wooden platform in the town square, her wrists bound with rough rope. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild, unforgiving to those who couldn't pay their debts, especially women without family or protection. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, causing sweat to trickle down her dirt-smudged face as she struggled against her captors. $500. The auctioneer shouted, his voice carrying across the crowd of men who had gathered for the human auction. $500 for this fine woman. She'll cook, clean, and serve however you please for the next 5 years to pay off her debts. Katherine's heart hammered in her chest as she scanned the sea of leering faces. How had her life come to this? Just 6 months ago, she'd been managing her late father's general store, struggling but surviving. Then the drought came, followed by the bank calling in the loans her father had taken. When the store failed, her father's debts became hers. In this unforgiving territory, debt servitude was still legal, a loophole that allowed the wealthy to claim the poor as temporary property. "Do I hear 600? The auctioneer grabbed Katherine's chin, forcing her to look up. "Pretty face, strong back, educated too. She can keep your books and teach your children." She yanked away from his grip, earning herself a harsh shove that nearly sent her tumbling off the platform. At 23, Katherine had expected many things from life, but being sold like cattle wasn't one of them. "700, called a voice from the crowd. Katherine's stomach turned as she recognized Silas Warner, the saloon owner who'd been pursuing her since her father's death. His small, beady eyes crawled over her body like spiders. 800, countered another man, Jeremiah Coleman, the banker who'd foreclosed on her store. "I'll take her debt in trade at my house." Tears blurred Katherine's vision as the bidding continued. These weren't just strangers, these were men she'd known her whole life, men who'd tipped their hats to her on the street, men who'd done business with her father. Now they bid for her as if she were a prized mare. $1,000. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife. The bidding stopped abruptly. Even the auctioneer fell silent as the crowd parted. A tall man on horseback approached the platform. Katherine squinted against the sun to see him better, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, wearing a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. A cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble. "Owen Callahan," someone whispered in the crowd. "Buying himself a woman." The auctioneer cleared his throat, finding his voice again. $1,000 from Mr. Callahan. "Do I hear 1,100? Silence fell over the crowd. No one matched the bid. Katherine had heard of Owen Callahan. Most everyone in the territory had. He owned the largest cattle ranch outside Twin Falls, a man of few words and decisive action. Some said he was fair, others said he was dangerous. All agreed he wasn't someone to cross. "Sold." The auctioneer's gavel came down with finality. "Miss Morgan now belongs to Mr. Callahan for the duration of her debt service." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion and climbed the steps to the platform. Up close, Katherine could see his eyes the color of storm clouds, intense and unreadable. He couldn't have been more than 30. Without a word, he handed a leather pouch to the auctioneer, who quickly counted the gold coins inside. "All in order, Mr. Callahan," the auctioneer said, handing him the contract of debt service. The cowboy took the paper, then surprised everyone by tearing it in half. He turned to Katherine, his expression impassive as he pulled a knife from his belt. She flinched, but he only used it to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You owe me nothing," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're free to go." Katherine stared at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. "I don't understand. Your debt's paid." "You're no one's servant." He returned the knife to his belt. "Do you have somewhere to go?" She swallowed hard, rubbing her raw wrists. "No, they took everything." He nodded once as if he'd expected this answer. "Then I offer you a job, paid wages. My housekeeper left last month. The position is yours if you want it." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you help me?" Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of emotion quickly masked. "No one should be sold for trying to survive." He gestured to his horse. "The offer stands. Take it or leave it." Katherine looked around at the disappointed faces of the men who'd been bidding on her, at the town that had watched her humiliation without protest. What choice did she really have? "I'll take the job," she said. Without another word, Owen Callahan offered her his hand and helped her onto his horse. As they rode away from Twin Falls, Katherine felt the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. She had no idea what awaited her at Callahan Ranch, but at least she was free, or as free as a destitute woman could be in the Wyoming Territory. The ride to Callahan Ranch was long and silent. Katherine sat stiffly in front of Owen Callahan, careful not to lean against him despite the jolting rhythm of the horse's gait. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when they finally crested a ridge, revealing a sprawling ranch nestled in a green valley below. "That's Callahan Ranch," Owen said, breaking his long silence. "Been in my family for 15 years. Katherine took in the sight a large two-story house built of sturdy logs and stone, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and in the distance, the dark shapes of cattle grazing on the lush grassland. It was larger and more prosperous-looking than she'd imagined. "It's impressive," she said quietly. "It's home." There was a note of pride in his voice. "You'll have your own room in the house, meals included with your wages." As they approached the ranch, a young man came running out to greet them, followed by an older woman with silver-streaked hair. "That's Thomas, my foreman's son," Owen explained. "And Mrs. Haverford. She cooks for the ranch hands, but she's been trying to manage the house too since our housekeeper left. She'll be glad for your help." Thomas took the reins as Owen dismounted, then reached up to help Katherine down. His hands were strong and steady as they encircled her waist, lifting her effortlessly from the saddle. For a brief moment, she was conscious of his closeness, of the clean scent of leather and pine that clung to him. "Thomas, this is Miss Morgan. She'll be taking over as housekeeper." The young man tipped his hat. "Madam." Mrs. Haverford approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank the Lord. I've been run ragged trying to keep up with everything. Welcome, Miss Morgan." Owen turned to Katherine. "Mrs. Haverford will show you to your room. Get settled in. We eat at sundown." Before Katherine could thank him again, he strode toward the barn, leaving her with the cook. Mrs. Haverford took her arm kindly. "Don't mind Mr. Callahan. He's not one for many words, but he's a good man. Come along, dear. You look like you could use a wash and a rest before supper." The house was surprisingly well appointed inside, not luxurious, but comfortable and clean, with solid furniture and cheerful curtains at the windows. Mrs. Haverford led her upstairs to a small but pleasant room at the back of the house. "This will be yours," the cook said. "There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I'll bring up a tub for you to bathe later. There should be some dresses in the trunk that might fit you. They belong to Mr. Callahan's sister when she visited last summer." Katherine ran her hand over the simple quilt that covered the bed. "Mrs. Haverford, why did he do it?" "Buy my debt contract just to tear it up." The older woman's face softened. "Mr. Callahan has his reasons, dear. He doesn't approve of debt servitude, says it's no better than slavery, which he fought against in the war. But $1,000 is a fortune." "To some, perhaps, not to Mr. Callahan. His cattle operation is one of the largest in the territory." She patted Katherine's shoulder. Rest now. I'll call you for supper." Left alone, Katherine sank onto the bed, emotion finally overwhelming her. Tears flowed freely as the events of the day caught up with her: the humiliation of the auction block, the fear of being sold to Warner or Coleman, and the unexpected rescue by a man she'd never met. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or suspicious of Owen Callahan's motives. Men didn't often help women without expecting something in return. After washing her face and hands in the basin, she opened the trunk Mrs. Haverford had mentioned. Inside were several simple but well-made dresses. She chose a blue calico that looked close to her size and changed out of her dirty, torn clothing. The dress was slightly large but far better than what she'd been wearing by the time Mrs. Haverford called her for supper. Katherine had composed herself, determined to earn her keep and pay back Owen Callahan's kindness, even if she wasn't exactly sure why he'd shown it. The dining room was occupied by only 3 people when she entered. Owen at the head of the table, Mrs. Haverford setting down a platter of roast beef, and an older man with weathered features who she assumed was the foreman. "Miss Morgan, this is Jack Hayes, my foreman," Owen said, rising briefly as she entered, a courtesy she hadn't expected. "Madam," Jack said with a nod. "Good to meet you." "Please sit." Owen gestured to an empty chair. The meal began quietly, with only the sounds of cutlery on plates filling the room. Katherine ate sparingly at first, though her stomach ached with hunger. It had been days since she'd had a proper meal. "Eat your fill," Owen said, noticing her restraint. "There's plenty." Jack cleared his throat. "So, Miss Morgan, Mr. Callahan tells us you ran the general store in Twin Falls." Grateful for the conversation, Katherine nodded. "After my father passed last year. I did the books since I was 16. We could use someone with a head for numbers," Jack commented. "Our last accountant in Cheyenne took off with half our cattle sale proceeds." Owen's jaw tightened at this mention, but he said nothing. "I'm sorry to hear that," Katherine said. "I'd be happy to help with the books, in addition to my housekeeping duties." Owen looked at her directly for the first time since they'd arrived at the ranch. "That wasn't part of our agreement. I won't take advantage." "It's not taking advantage if I offer," she countered. "I'm good with figures, and I'll need something to occupy my mind besides dusting and sweeping." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "All right. You can look at the ledgers tomorrow." The rest of the meal passed more comfortably, with Jack sharing stories about the ranch and Mrs. Haverford commenting on the gossip from town. Owen said little, but Katherine caught him watching her several times, his expression unreadable. After dinner, as Katherine helped Mrs. Haverford clear the dishes, Owen stopped her. "A word, Miss Morgan." He led her to a small office off the main room where a desk stood covered with papers. "Your duties will start tomorrow. Breakfast at sunrise. The house needs attention, but don't overwork yourself. Mrs. Haverford will show you what needs doing." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, for everything." He waved off her gratitude. "One more thing. The men know not to bother you, but if anyone makes you uncomfortable, tell me immediately." The protective sentiment surprised her. "I can handle myself." "I don't doubt it, but on my ranch, everyone is treated with respect." He hesitated, then added, "What happened to you in town today, it wasn't right." "The world isn't often fair to women without means or protection," she said quietly, his gray eyes darkened. "No, it isn't." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Good night, Miss Morgan." "Good night, Mr. Callahan." After he left, Katherine stood in the office, looking around at the ledgers stacked on shelves. Tomorrow she would begin her new life here, a life unexpectedly rescued from the degradation of debt servitude by a man whose motives she still couldn't fathom. As she climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She fell asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, dreaming of storm-gray eyes and the words that had changed her fate. "You owe me nothing." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm Katherine found surprisingly comfortable. Each morning, she rose before dawn to help Mrs. Haverford prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The days were filled with cleaning, mending, and keeping the ranch's accounts, a task she found she enjoyed, bringing order to the chaotic bookkeeping left by Owen's previous accountant. Owen himself remained something of a mystery. He was often away, riding the boundaries of his vast property or negotiating cattle sales in neighboring towns. When he was at the ranch, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance. Sometimes, she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. But he never said anything beyond discussing ranch business or making polite conversation at meals. One evening in late July, a month after her arrival at Callahan Ranch, Katherine was working in the office when Owen returned from a 3-day absence. He looked tired, dust covering his clothes and a day's stubble darkening his jaw. "Welcome back," she said, setting down her pen. "There's stew keeping warm in the kitchen if you're hungry." "Thank you." He removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "How are the accounts coming?" "Well, I think. I've identified several discrepancies from the last year. Your former accountant was skimming more than you realized, but I've managed to reconcile most of the ledgers." He moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the neat columns of figures. She was acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of him beneath the trail dust. "You've done good work," he said, his voice low. "Better than I expected." "Is that a compliment, Mr. Callahan?" she asked, unable to keep a small smile from her lips, the corner of his mouth turned up. "I suppose it is, Miss Morgan." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that made Katherine's breath catch. Then Owen stepped back, his expression becoming neutral once more. "There's going to be a social in town next Saturday," he said, changing the subject. "A summer dance. Mrs. Haverford mentioned you might like to attend." Katherine blinked at the unexpected topic. I don't think that would be wise. People in Twin Falls still talk about what happened at the auction, and I have nothing suitable to wear." "People talk because they have nothing better to do," he said dismissively. "As for something to wear, I'll be sending Thomas to Cheyenne tomorrow for supplies. Write down what you need and he'll fetch it." "Mr. Callahan, I can't accept. Consider it an advance on your wages," he interrupted. "You've more than earned it with your work on these accounts." Before she could protest further, he picked up his hat. "Good night, Miss Morgan." As he left, Katherine wondered at the change in him. Was he merely being kind to an employee, or was there something more behind his invitation? The thought made her heart flutter in a way that both excited and frightened her. Owen Callahan was her employer, a man who'd saved her from a terrible fate, but still her employer. It would be foolish to read anything more into his actions. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, Katherine couldn't help but recall the intensity in his gray eyes when they'd looked at each other. There had been something there, something that went beyond mere politeness or employer-employee relations. Whether she should encourage it was another question entirely. The Saturday of the dance arrived warm and clear. Katherine had spent the morning helping Mrs. Haverford prepare food for the ranch hands' lunch, then retired to her room to prepare for the evening. The dress Thomas had brought back from Cheyenne was more beautiful than anything she'd owned before, a deep emerald green with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd protested that it was too fine, but Mrs. Haverford had insisted it was perfect. Mr. Callahan specifically asked for something nice. The cook had told her with a knowing smile. Now, as Katherine pinned up her chestnut hair, leaving a few soft curls to frame her face, she wondered again at Owen's intentions. In the weeks she'd spent at the ranch, she'd come to admire him, his fairness with his workers, his quiet competence, the way he cared for his land and animals. But she'd also seen his guarded nature, the walls he kept firmly in place. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Haverford stood outside, beaming. "Oh my, don't you look lovely? Mr. Callahan is waiting downstairs, and I do believe he's wearing his good coat." Katherine took a deep breath to steady herself before descending the stairs. Owen stood at the bottom, and the sight of him made her pause. He was dressed in a dark suit coat over a crisp white shirt, his usual trail clothes replaced by attire befitting a successful rancher. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair, and for a moment, he looked almost like a different man, one who belonged in a city parlor rather than on the open range. His eyes widened slightly as he saw her, a reaction that sent a flush of pleasure through her. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice oddly formal, "you look very nice." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, so do you." An awkward silence fell between them until Mrs. Haverford gently pushed Katherine forward. "Well, go on then. You'll miss the start of the dancing if you stand around staring at each other all evening." The ride to town was quiet, the buggy moving steadily along the road as the sun began its descent. Katherine found herself stealing glances at Owen's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his hands held the reins with easy confidence. "Are you nervous about returning to town?" he asked suddenly. She considered the question. "A little. I haven't been back since that day." He nodded. "If anyone says anything unkind, you let me know." "Are you planning to defend my honor, Mr. Callahan?" she asked, a teasing note entering her voice despite her nervousness. A smile tugged at his lips. "If necessary. And here I thought you were a man who avoided trouble." "Not when it matters." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "And you shouldn't call me Mr. Callahan tonight. We're not at the ranch. Owen will do." The informality surprised her. "Then you must call me Katherine." "Katherine," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. The way he said it, with a gentle emphasis on the first syllable, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Twin Falls looked different in the soft glow of early evening. Lanterns hung from the porch of the town hall where the dance was being held, and the sounds of fiddle music and laughter spilled out into the street. Owen helped Katherine down from the buggy, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he offered her his arm. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, placing her hand on his arm. "Ready." The moment they entered the hall, conversations faltered and heads turned. Katherine felt the weight of stares and whispers, but Owen's steady presence beside her gave her courage. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin, refusing to show any shame or embarrassment. "Mr. Callahan," Mayor Thompson approached, his smile broad but his eyes curious. "Good to see you in town, and Miss Morgan, what a pleasant surprise." "Mayor," Owen nodded curtly. "Nice event you've put together." "Yes, well, we try to bring a bit of civilization to our little corner of Wyoming." The mayor's gaze darted between them. "Miss Morgan, I trust you're well." "Very well, thank you," she replied evenly. Before the conversation could become more awkward, Owen guided her away. "Would you care to dance?" he asked quietly. Katherine hesitated. "I haven't danced in a long time." "Neither have I. We can be rusty together." The fiddle player struck up a lively reel and Owen led her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as they joined the other couples. At first, Katherine was conscious only of trying not to step on his feet, but soon the music carried her along, and she found herself laughing as Owen spun her through the figures of the dance. "You dance very well for a cowboy," she said breathlessly as the music ended. "I wasn't always a cowboy," he replied, a hint of something deeper in his voice. Another dance. They danced 3 more sets before stopping for refreshments. Katherine was flushed and smiling, more relaxed than she'd been in months. The initial stares had mostly subsided, though she still caught curious glances now and then. "Having a good time?" Owen asked, handing her a cup of punch. "Yes, surprisingly so." She took a sip, looking up at him. "Thank you for bringing me." "I should be thanking you," he said quietly. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed an evening this much." The simple honesty of his statement touched her. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across them. Well, if it isn't the debt dodger and her benefactor. Katherine stiffened at the familiar voice. Silas Warner stood before them, his thin lips curled in a sneer. "Warner," Owen acknowledged coldly. "I suggest you move along." The saloon owner ignored him, his gaze fixed on Katherine. "Tell me, Miss Morgan, what services are you providing Mr. Callahan that were worth $1,000? The whole town's curious." Katherine felt as though she'd been slapped. Before she could recover, Owen stepped forward, his body tense with restrained anger. "Apologize to the lady," he said, his voice dangerously soft. Warner scoffed. "Or what? Everyone knows why a man buys a woman's debt." He never finished the sentence. Owen's fist connected with his jaw in a swift, controlled movement, sending the smaller man stumbling backward. The music screeched to a halt as people turned to stare. "Miss Morgan is my housekeeper and accountant," Owen said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "She is employed at fair wages and is owed respect by everyone in this town. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me. Is that understood?" No one spoke. Warner picked himself up from the floor, touching his bleeding lip with a look of shocked indignation. "You'll regret that, Callahan," he muttered. "I doubt it." Owen turned to Katherine, his expression softening. "Would you like to leave?" She nodded, unable to trust her voice. As Owen escorted her out, she felt the weight of every stare on her back, but she kept her head high. Only when they were in the buggy, heading back toward the ranch, did she allow the tears to fall. "I'm sorry," Owen said, his knuckles white on the reins. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "No, I'm grateful." She wiped at her cheeks. "But this is exactly why I didn't want to come. People will always think the worst. People like Warner aren't worth your concern." He glanced at her, his expression troubled. "Katherine, I need you to know something. What I did that day buying your contract, there were no ulterior motives. I saw an injustice and I acted, nothing more." "Then why invite me to the dance tonight?" she asked, the question that had been in her mind all evening finally escaping. Owen was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Because in the past month, I've come to admire you. Your resilience, your intelligence. The way you've made a place for yourself at the ranch." He paused. "I wanted to spend time with you away from work. That's all." The simple honesty of his answer made Katherine's heart beat faster. "I've come to admire you too," she admitted softly. He looked at her then, a question in his eyes that made her breath catch. But he only nodded, turning his attention back to the road ahead. The rest of the journey passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence charged with possibility and unspoken feelings that neither of them was quite ready to voice. When they reached the ranch, Owen helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the silver light of the moon, his face was partly in shadow, but his eyes were clear and intent on hers. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Katherine said, suddenly shy, despite how it ended. "The pleasure was mine." He hesitated, then added, "I won't apologize for hitting Warner. He deserved it." A small smile curved her lips. "I wasn't asking you to." Owen reached out, briefly touching a curl that had come loose from her pins. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Katherine felt her heart skip. "Good night, Katherine," he said softly. "Good night, Owen." As she walked into the house and up to her room, Katherine knew something had changed between them. The walls Owen kept around himself had begun to crumble, revealing glimpses of the man beneath. And her own carefully guarded heart had started to open to possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. The morning after the dance, Katherine awoke to find the ranch in an unusual state of activity. Ranch hands were rushing about, saddling horses and checking weapons. Alarmed, she hurried downstairs to find Owen in deep conversation with Jack in the kitchen. "What's happening?" she asked. Owen looked up, his expression grim. "Cattle rustlers. They hit the north pasture last night, took about 30 head and shot one of my men," Katherine gasped. "Is he?" "He'll live. Doc Wilson is with him now." Owen strapped on his gun belt. "I'm riding out with the men to track them." "Be careful," she said before she could stop herself. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her concern. "Always am. We should be back by nightfall." After the men rode out, Katherine tried to focus on her usual tasks, but worry nagged at her throughout the day. Rustlers were often desperate, dangerous men. The thought of Owen facing them made her stomach knot with fear. When the sun began to set with no sign of the men returning, her anxiety grew. Mrs. Haverford tried to reassure her as they prepared a dinner that might go uneaten. "Mr. Callahan knows what he's doing," the older woman said. "He was a scout during the war, you know. Learned to track and fight with the best of them." "I didn't know that," Katherine admitted. There was so much about Owen she had yet to learn. It was well past midnight when the sound of horses finally roused Katherine from her uneasy doze in the parlor chair. She rushed to the door as the men dismounted, searching for Owen among them. She found him helping one of the younger ranch hands, whose arm was bound in a makeshift sling. "You're back," she said, relief making her voice unsteady. Owen looked up, surprise crossing his tired features. "You're still awake. I couldn't sleep. Is everyone all right?" A few scrapes and bruises. "Tim here took a bullet graze, but nothing serious." He helped the young cowboy toward the bunkhouse. "We got most of the cattle back, lost the rustlers in the mountains." Katherine followed him to the kitchen after the injured were settled. Owen sank heavily into a chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Without a word, she poured him a cup of coffee from the pot Mrs. Haverford had left warming on the stove. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. "You didn't have to wait up." "I wanted to." She sat across from him. "I was worried." He looked at her over the rim of his cup, something warming in his gray eyes. "Were you, of course. You could have been hurt." She hesitated, then added softly, "I've grown rather attached to this place. To the people here." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. "I've been thinking," Owen said after a moment, changing the subject. "The books you've been keeping there better than anything I've seen before. You have a real talent for it." "Thank you. I was wondering if you'd consider taking on a more formal role, as the ranch's business manager, not just housekeeper, with proper pay, of course." Katherine blinked in surprise. "Business manager, but I'm a woman." "You're the most capable person on this ranch when it comes to figures and contracts," he said matter-of-factly. "Man or woman doesn't signify." The offer touched her deeply, not just the position itself, but what it represented. Owen saw her as more than just a woman to be rescued or a servant to keep his house. He valued her mind, her abilities. "I'd be honored," she said finally. He nodded, satisfaction crossing his face. "Good. We'll discuss the details tomorrow. You should get some sleep." As she rose to leave, Owen caught her hand. The contact sent a jolt through her, warm and unexpected. "Katherine," he said, his voice low, "thank you for waiting up, for caring." She squeezed his hand gently before withdrawing. "Good night, Owen." That night, as she lay in bed, Katherine found herself thinking of Owen in a way that went beyond gratitude or admiration. The concern she'd felt while he was gone, the relief at his safe return, these weren't the emotions of an employee for her employer. They were the feelings of a woman for a man who had begun to claim a place in her heart. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Katherine's life at Callahan Ranch. Her new position as business manager gave her responsibilities beyond the house, taking her into town to negotiate with merchants, and even to Cheyenne to meet with cattle buyers. Owen insisted she have her own horse for these journeys, a gentle mare named Willow, and Katherine found a newfound freedom in being able to ride across the ranch's vast acreage. More importantly, her relationship with Owen was evolving. Though he maintained a certain professional distance when others were present, when they were alone working on accounts in the office or riding the boundaries of the property, a different man emerged. He spoke more freely of his past, of growing up in Missouri and fighting for the Union in the war. In turn, Katherine shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania before her family moved west, of her mother's early death, and the close bond she'd shared with her father. One crisp September evening, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The air held the first hint of autumn, a coolness that promised the coming change of seasons. "Beautiful," Katherine murmured, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Yes," Owen agreed, though when she glanced at him he was looking at her, not the sunset. The intensity in his gaze made her cheeks warm. "Owen," she began hesitantly, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." "What is it?" "That day in Twin Falls. Why did you really do it? Why spend so much money to free a stranger?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes returning to the horizon. "You remind me of my sister," he said finally. "Your sister," Katherine repeated, surprised. "Mrs. Haverford mentioned she visited last summer." "Not that sister, my younger sister, Emily." His voice grew softer. "She died during the war. She was 17. "I'm sorry," Katherine said gently. "What happened?" Owen's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "After our parents died, I joined the Union Army, left Emily with family in St. Louis. While I was away, the bank foreclosed on our family home. Emily was forced into service to pay the debt." His jaw clenched. "By the time I found out and made it back, she was gone. Pneumonia, they said, but it was really the working conditions. 18-hour days in a textile mill, no proper food or rest." The pain in his voice cut through Katherine. Instinctively, she reached out, covering his hand with hers. "That's why you tore up my contract. You were saving me like you couldn't save her." He nodded, turning his hand to clasp hers. "When I saw you on that auction block, I saw Emily. I couldn't stand by and let it happen again." "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "It helps me understand you better." Owen looked down at their joined hands, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "At first, that's all it was. Atonement, maybe, but now." "Now?" she prompted when he fell silent. His eyes met hers, vulnerability and something deeper shining in their gray depths. "Now I'm glad every day that I was in Twin Falls that morning, not because of Emily, but because it brought you here, to the ranch, to me." Katherine's heart quickened at his words. "Owen." Before she could say more, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the moment. Owen released her hand reluctantly, rising to his feet as a rider galloped into the yard. It was Thomas, dust-covered and breathless. "Mr. Callahan, trouble in town. The bank's been robbed and they're saying Warner's behind it. Sheriff's forming a posse." Owen's expression hardened. "Warner, are they sure?" "No, sir, but he's missing, and one of the tellers recognized a man who works for him." Owen turned to Katherine, regret in his eyes. "I have to go." "I know," she said, though fear clutched at her heart. "Be careful." He held her gaze for a moment longer, as if wanting to say more, then nodded and strode toward the barn to saddle his horse. Katherine watched him ride away with Thomas, the moment of connection broken but not forgotten. The next morning brought no word from town, and Katherine tried to distract herself with work. By midday, her worry had grown to the point where she could no longer focus on the ledgers. Making a decision, she saddled Willow and rode toward Twin Falls, telling Mrs. Haverford she needed to check on some business at the bank. The town was in an uproar when she arrived. Groups of people stood on street corners, talking excitedly, and the sheriff's office was surrounded by onlookers. Katherine dismounted in front of the general store under new ownership now and approached a woman she recognized as the milliner's wife. "Mrs. Delaney, what's happening? I heard about the robbery." "Oh, Miss Morgan, it's been quite the commotion. They caught the robbers last night, Silas Warner and 3 of his men. They were trying to flee to the Montana Territory." Relief washed through Katherine. "Was anyone hurt in the capture?" "One of Warner's men was killed, and I heard Owen Callahan took a bullet, though they say it's not serious." Katherine's blood ran cold. "Owen was shot. Where is he?" "At Doc Wilson's, I believe. Katherine didn't wait to hear more, hurrying down the street to the doctor's small house. She knocked urgently, and the door was opened by the doctor himself, looking tired but not overly concerned. "Miss Morgan, I assume you're here for Mr. Callahan?" "Yes. I heard he was wounded. Bullet grazed his side. Nothing life-threatening, but he lost some blood and I wanted to keep him under observation." The doctor stepped back. "He's in the back room. You can see him, but he needs rest." Katherine found Owen propped up on a bed, his torso wrapped in bandages, his face pale but alert. He looked surprised to see her. "Katherine, what are you doing in town?" "I came to see if the bank was open," she lied, then immediately shook her head. "No, that's not true. I was worried when you didn't return, and then I heard you were shot." His expression softened. "It's just a scratch. Doc's being cautious." She moved to the bedside, fighting the urge to touch him, to reassure herself he was truly all right. "What happened?" "Warner and his men put up a fight when we cornered them. It got messy." He shifted, wincing slightly. "The money's been recovered, at least, and Warner will be going to prison for a long time." "Good," Katherine said firmly. "He deserves it." Owen reached out, taking her hand. "You shouldn't have worried about me." "Well, I did," she replied, her voice catching. "I do." Something changed in his eyes, a decision being made. "Katherine, what I was trying to say last night before we were interrupted." "Yes." Her heart began to race. "These past months, having you at the ranch working with you, it's made me realize something." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "When I first saw you in Twin Falls, I acted out of memory, trying to right a wrong from my past. But now, when I look at you, I don't see Emily. I see you, Katherine Morgan, a woman I've come to care for deeply." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "Owen, I don't know if you feel the same," he continued, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "And I know it might seem improper, given how we met, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is merely friendship or professional regard." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming emotion. "I do feel the same," she whispered. "I've tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, or that it would be inappropriate because you're my employer, but, he prompted gently, "but my heart doesn't seem to care about those reasons." She smiled tremulously. "I care for you too, Owen, more than I thought possible." The joy that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer until she was seated on the edge of the bed. With his free hand, he reached up to touch her cheek. "May I kiss you, Katherine Morgan?" In answer, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tenderly but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. His hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, and the feeling of finally coming home. When they parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I think Doc Wilson would disapprove of me raising my heart rate like this," he murmured, a smile in his voice. Katherine laughed softly. "Then I should probably leave before he throws me out. Come back tomorrow. I should be released by then. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," she promised. As she rode back to the ranch, Katherine felt as though she were floating, her heart lighter than it had been in years. What had begun as the worst day of her life, being auctioned off for her debts, had led her to this moment of unexpected joy. She couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The following weeks were the happiest of Katherine's life. Owen recovered quickly from his wound and returned to the ranch, where their relationship blossomed in the golden days of early autumn. They were discreet at first, mindful of gossip, but the ranch hands and Mrs. Haverford exchanged knowing smiles when Owen sought Katherine's company on evening rides, or when they lingered in conversation long after dinner was cleared away. As September gave way to October, the ranch bustled with preparations for the winter ahead. Hay was cut and stored, cattle were moved to lower pastures, and supplies were laid in against the snow that would soon blanket the mountains. Through it all, Katherine worked alongside Owen, their partnership extending beyond romance to a shared vision for the ranch's future. One crisp afternoon, as they rode back from inspecting the northern boundary, Owen suggested they stop at a promontory overlooking the ranch. The view was breathtaking, the sprawling buildings below, surrounded by the patchwork of pastures, and the distant mountains touched with the first snow of the season. "I never tire of this sight," Katherine said, dismounting to stand at the edge of the overlook. Owen joined her, taking her hand. "Nor do I, especially when you're in it." She smiled up at him, still marveling at how freely they could now express their feelings. "Flatterer, just honest." His expression grew more serious. "Katherine, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes." Owen took both her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest I can remember. Having you at the ranch, working with you, seeing you each day, it's changed everything." "For me too," she said softly. "When I found you in Twin Falls, I told you that you owed me nothing." "That's still true." He paused, his gray eyes intent on hers. "But I find myself hoping you might want to give me something anyway." "What's that?" she asked, though she thought she knew where this was leading. Owen reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Opening it, he revealed a simple but beautiful gold ring set with a small diamond. "Your heart, your hand in marriage, your promise to build a life with me here." Joy surged through Katherine, bringing tears to her eyes. "Oh, Owen, I know it hasn't been very long," he continued quickly. "And if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Katherine Morgan. I think I started falling in love with you that very first day, even if I didn't recognize it then." Katherine touched his face gently. "I love you too, and I don't need more time. My answer is yes." The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "We'll marry before winter sets in," he said. "If that suits you." "It suits me perfectly." As they rode back to the ranch to share their news, Katherine glanced down at the ring glinting on her finger. 6 months ago, she had stood on an auction block, her future bleak and her spirit nearly broken. Now, she was riding beside the man she loved, toward a home and a life she had never dared to dream possible. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she replied. If I hadn't lost everything, I never would have found you." His eyes softened with understanding. "And I never would have found you. Maybe some debts are worth having after all." Katherine laughed, her heart full. "As long as they're debts of the heart, not the kind that get you auctioned off in the town square." Owen reached across to take her hand. "Never again, Katherine. From now on, the only auctions in your life will be for cattle and horses. And the only man I'll belong to will be my husband," she added softly. "By choice, not by contract." The wedding took place on the first day of November, with the mountains wearing their first substantial snowfall like a wedding gift. The ceremony was held in the Twin Falls Church, attended by the ranch hands, townspeople whose respect Katherine had earned in her business dealings, and even a few of Owen's cattle buyer associates from Cheyenne. Katherine wore a gown of ivory silk that Owen had specially ordered from Denver, with Mrs. Haverford's lace veil completing the ensemble. As she walked down the aisle toward Owen, who stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The minister spoke the traditional words, but it was the vows Owen and Katherine had written themselves that moved the congregation to tears. "Katherine," Owen said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "before you, my life was just work and duty. You brought light and laughter back into my world. I promise to cherish you always, to respect your mind and heart, to be your partner in all things, and to love you through whatever challenges life brings our way." Katherine blinked back tears as she spoke her own vows. "Owen, you saved me in more ways than you know. Not just that day in town, but every day since, by believing in me, valuing me, and loving me. I promise to stand by your side through good times and bad, to be your comfort in sorrow and your companion in joy, and to love you with all my heart for the rest of our days." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with such tenderness that several of the ranch hands cheered and whistled, causing Katherine to blush and Owen to grin unrepentantly. The celebration afterward at Callahan Ranch lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the barn cleared for the occasion. As evening fell, Katherine found herself standing with Owen on the porch of what was now their home, watching the stars emerge in the clear November sky. "Happy, Mrs. Callahan?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." He turned her to face him, his expression serious despite the joy of the day. "I want you to know something, Katherine. This ranch, everything I have, it's ours now together, equal partners in all things. Owen, I didn't marry you for your property. I know that," he smiled. "But I want it legal and binding. I've had papers drawn up putting half the ranch in your name. No matter what happens, you'll never be at anyone's mercy again." Touched beyond words, Katherine reached up to kiss him. "Thank you, not for the property, but for understanding why that matters to me." "I understand because I love you," he said simply. "Now, shall we say good night to our guests? I find I'm eager to begin our life together, just the two of us." With a smile that held both innocence and promise, Katherine took his hand. "Lead the way, husband. Lead the way." Spring came early to Wyoming in 1877, bringing with it new life to Callahan Ranch. The winter had passed in a contented blur for the newlyweds, who had spent the snowbound months learning the rhythms of married life while running the ranch together. Katherine had proven herself not just in the books but in ranch operations as well, earning the respect of even the most skeptical cowboys. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, other changes were becoming apparent. Katherine stood at the bedroom window one April morning, watching the sun rise over the eastern mountains, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly beneath her nightgown. "You're up early," Owen murmured, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist, his hand covering hers protectively. "Your son was restless," she replied with a smile, leaning back against him. "Or daughter," he reminded her. They had agreed not to assume either way, though Owen had taken to calling the baby Little Cowboy when he thought Katherine wasn't listening. "Either way, this child already has your inability to sleep past sunrise," she teased, turning in his arms to face him. Owen's expression as he gazed at her was one of such love and wonder that it still took her breath away, even after months of marriage. "You're beautiful," he said softly, his hand caressing the curve where their child grew. "More beautiful every day. Even with my dresses getting tighter and my ankles swelling, especially then," he assured her, kissing her forehead. "It means our family is growing. Family." The word filled Katherine with joy. After losing her parents, she had thought herself alone in the world. Now she had not just Owen, but the promise of a child and perhaps more children in the years to come. Later that day, as Katherine sat on the porch mending one of Owen's shirts, a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. She recognized Thomas, who had been in town collecting mail and supplies. "Mrs. Callahan," he called, dismounting quickly. "I've got news from Twin Falls. Thought you'd want to know right away." "What is it, Thomas?" she asked, setting aside her sewing. "The judge finally ruled on Warner's case. He got 20 years for the bank robbery and another 5 for resisting arrest and shooting at the posse." Relief washed over Katherine. Silas Warner had been a shadow over her happiness for too long. "Thank you for telling me. Is Mr. Callahan in the north pasture?" "Yes, madam." "Want me to ride out and let him know?" "No, I'll tell him when he returns for dinner." She smiled. "One more piece of good news to share today." That evening, after sharing the news about Warner with Owen, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars appear. The spring air was cool but not cold, fragrant with the scent of new growth and possibility. "I've been thinking," Owen said, his arm around her shoulders. "We should expand the house before the baby comes. Add a proper nursery and maybe another bedroom or 2. Katherine smiled, leaning against him. "Planning for more children already. I'd like a big family," he admitted. "If you're willing, I'd like that too." She took his hand, placing it over her belly where their first child grew. "But let's start with this one and see how we manage." Owen chuckled. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing moving gently back and forth. Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here from near destitution to this life of love and security. The road had been difficult at times, but every step had led her to Owen, to this home, to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About debts," she said thoughtfully. "How sometimes what seems like a burden can become a blessing." He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "When I told you that day in Twin Falls that you owed me nothing, I meant it, but I never imagined how much you would give me anyway." "Love isn't about owing or paying back," Katherine said softly. "It's about choosing each other every day." Owen tightened his arm around her. "And I choose you, Katherine Callahan, today and always." As the stars shimmered overhead and the promise of their future stretched before them, Katherine closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of thanks for the twist of fate that had brought her to an auction block in Twin Falls, and to the arms of a cowboy who had paid her debts and asked for nothing in return, yet had received her heart as the most precious gift of all. The years flowed like the river that ran through Callahan Ranch, sometimes rushing, sometimes meandering, but always moving forward. Katherine gave birth to a healthy son they named James in the late summer of 1877, a strong boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, their daughter Emily arrived, named for the sister Owen had lost a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. By 1882, Callahan Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in Wyoming Territory. Owen and Katherine had expanded beyond cattle to include horse breeding, with a line of sturdy, intelligent quarter horses that were sought after throughout the West. Their partnership had proven fruitful in business as well as in life, with Katherine's head for figures complementing Owen's practical knowledge of ranching. One summer evening, as the children played in the yard under the watchful eye of Mrs. Haverford, who had declared herself honorary grandmother to the Callahan children, Owen found Katherine in the office poring over a contract for a new horse sale. "Still working?" he asked, coming to stand behind her chair. She leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "Just finishing up. The Carson deal is going to be our biggest horse sale yet, thanks to your negotiation skills." He squeezed her shoulders gently. "I have a surprise for you." "Oh," she turned to look up at him. "What kind of surprise? Come with me and find out." He took her hand, leading her outside to where a buggy waited, already hitched to their best driving horse. "Owen, where are we going?" she asked, intrigued. "You'll see." He helped her into the buggy, then climbed up beside her. "Mrs. Haverford will watch the children. We won't be gone long." As they drove toward town, Katherine tried to guess what Owen had planned, but he remained mysteriously silent, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When they reached Twin Falls, he guided the buggy not to the main street, but to a side road that led to a familiar building, the old Morgan General Store, which had stood empty for several years after Katherine's auction. "Why are we stopping here?" she asked, confusion and old memories mingling as she looked at the weathered storefront. Owen helped her down from the buggy. "Because it's yours again, or ours, I should say." Katherine stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "I bought it last month when it came up for auction." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, pressing it into her palm. "The town needs a good general store again, and I thought you might like to have a piece of your father's legacy back." Tears filled Katherine's eyes as she looked from the key to the building to her husband's face. "Owen, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." He put his arm around her waist. "We can fix it up, make it better than before, run it alongside the ranch operations, or not if you don't want to. It's your choice." "Our choice," she corrected, leaning into him. "And I think it's a wonderful idea." They walked up to the door together, and Katherine's hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key and turned it. The door swung open to reveal the dusty interior, empty shelves lining the walls where once her father's merchandise had been displayed. But instead of sadness, she felt a surge of hope and possibility. "We could open in time for the fall harvest," she said, already envisioning how the store could serve the growing community. "Stock it with quality goods from Denver and Cheyenne." Owen smiled at the enthusiasm in her voice. "And we could use the back room as an office for both the ranch and store business. James and Emily could help when they're older," Katherine added. "Learn the business from the ground up." "A family legacy," Owen agreed, "for generations to come." As they stood in the empty store planning their future, Katherine was struck by how far they had come. 6 years ago, she had stood on an auction block, her father's store taken from her, her future uncertain. Now, she stood in that same store as its owner, with a loving husband by her side and 2 beautiful children at home. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I never properly thanked you for what you did that day." Owen shook his head. "You never needed to. I told you then you owed me nothing." "And yet I feel I owe you everything," she replied softly. "My freedom, our children, this life we've built together." He took her hands in his expression serious. "No, Katherine, what we have wasn't built on debt or obligation. It was built on choice. Every day we choose each other." Every day, we build this life together, as equals." She reached up to touch his face, his beard now threaded with a few strands of silver that only made him more handsome in her eyes. "I love you, Owen Callahan, more now than I did the day I married you, and I suspect more tomorrow than I do today. And I love you." He leaned down to kiss her, a kiss that still held the passion of their early days but was now deepened by years of shared joys and challenges. Always. As they locked up the store and drove back to the ranch, to their children and the home they had created together, Katherine reflected on the strange twists of fate that shaped a life. What had seemed like her darkest hour, being auctioned off for her debts, had led her to her greatest happiness. And the man who had paid the price had asked for nothing in return, yet had received a lifetime of love. Some debts, she thought, could never be repaid. But some gifts, like the gift of love, were never meant to be.